BC Aviation Museum here on the peninsula has many aircraft displays. Let's go in and check it out.
This is probably the best fighting scout of the first half of World War I, and it has a very unique engine. It's called a rotary engine. The museum was opened in 1989, and we opened with a single hangar, dirt floor, very modest collection of aircraft. And now, over the years, we've successfully built it into 2 large display hangars and a restoration hangar, as well as 30 aircraft from all decades of manned flight in British Columbia. And this is the second half of World War I. It's more vulnerable to combat damage because if you lose the radiator, if you puncture a hose or the radiator, you lose the fluid, you lose the motor, you're going down. We acquire aircraft when and where we can find them. Some are donated intact, some are donated in very poor condition. Some, if you can believe it, were actually created out of a pile of junk and leftovers. And an example is a World War II Harvard trainer, which is right behind me here. And it was actually leftovers from a large restoration project that we turned into a display. We have about 4 from the Second World War, and many of them saw actual combat. Some were trainers. One is a converted water bomber. The one behind me is an example of an aircraft that was a patrol aircraft on this base in World War II.
We are in the memorial room at the BC Aviation Museum, which is located on the grounds of the Victoria International Airport. The airport first started out as a military base and quickly became Canada's 3rd largest airfield for much of World War II, where 181 people lost their lives during training.
There was great concern over the increasing militarization of the Pacific by the Japanese. And that's when it was realized all of a sudden we don't have any military bases in Western Canada, and they needed a base that could protect the Pacific Fleet at Esquimalt, as well as the approaches to Vancouver Harbor. Hence, this became a favored location for a strategic airbase. By the time that the crews came here, they'd been through their initial training, they'd been through their advanced training, but what they needed now was to really form fighting units and to get practical, hands-on experience. Training was very hazardous, and there was a considerable loss of life. And in its years of operation, a total of 181 people perished on the airfield or from the airfield in a variety of accidents. And you know, that's a considerable number. When you think that a total of 850 people perished in training in all of Canada, almost 20% of them came from this single base. So you have to ask, why was there such a high loss from this base? The nature of the training tended to be hazardous in that it was low level because they were torpedo dropping, and often over considerable stretches of water. So if something goes wrong, you go into the Pacific. And the Pacific is a very unforgiving place. You're not going to survive as you might if you came down over land. Another reason I could think of is that the weather was very difficult because you have mountains, you have sudden changes of weather fronts, you have cloud, you have fog, very hazardous. Another reason I can think of is that the aircraft themselves, training was often the end of the line, so these were tired machines. They were machines that were not equipped for frontline service in Europe, and some had known deficiencies or issues in flying them. So there's a variety of reasons, but all of it added up to an incredible loss.
In the summer of 2017, a memorial was made called The Lost Airmen of the Empire to honor the 181 people who lost their lives during training. For Community Producers, I'm Tara Keeping.